Okay. Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Corporate Services Economic Growth Review and Scrutiny Committee. It's the 12th of December. Firstly, can I have apologies for absence?
Yeah, we've got apologies from Councillor Paul Kelvin, Nick Oliver and Alex Wallace.
Okay. Any more?
I think there is Peter Jackson.
Peter Jackson. Disclosure of members' interests. Anything to disclose?
Yeah, I'd like to take advice on item number 6, please, because I'm on the board of advance, but this is a generic policy about all council-owned companies rather than specific to advance. So, what am I able to stay and participate, or would I have to absent myself from that?
Jan, could you hear? Did you hear that?
Jan said she can't hear anything.
That's not helpful.
I think it would be a legal question, Chair. In
Well,
any case, I'm not too sure whether Jan could give you proper legal advice on your question.
So I think the view would be as it's a generic report, not that advance specific. I don't think we'd be able to participate.
I don't think there's a pecuniary interest.
No, it's not.
So long as you're not prejudiced in your own mind about it, Councillor Murphy, I would suggest that you would probably be okay. But it's obviously I can't advise you formally.
Yeah,
So ultimately it's up to you, but my thoughts are it can be fine.
We certainly make the not giving interest.
Okay. Right. We'll move on then. Forward plan cabinet decisions.
Yeah. As Secretary Chair, I do have one addition. Cabinet in January will consider the strategic change programme, business case. So you have agreed to include that onto your agenda. Very pre-scrutiny reports and the trade companies report as well. So,
Yeah.
And we will invite all scrutiny members to that meeting.
How we get on with Jan's sons?
Still can't hear, I'm just trying to.
It looks like microphone is working. At least you can see the bar changing when we speak.
Yeah, and it's on. It's on the hour. And that's on the hour.
Right. Well, while we're doing that, should we move on? We're going to rearrange the agenda. We're going to take item 8 now, which is economic development. I think Wojciech wants to.
Yeah, I will just introduce it. So we'll give you today an update about economic regeneration and development. Janice has prepared a little presentation which will just briefly present what we do and how we do. I don't think there is lots of material in that presentation. It's more like a question and answer session. Generally, things going reasonably well. We are facing some inflationary pressures across different capital projects, but we are dealing with them in case-by-case basis, either by ourselves or by dealing with government. And I think we are going in the right direction. Exactly the point. Thank you.
I know it's easy to get the presentation up and just trying to
Right. So,
work through this issue.
Let's wait.
Whatever I've done has seen. I think she can you hear now, Jan?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I don't know what you did, but it worked. Thanks.
So, right. Can we put Janice's presentation up? Right. Okay. Janice.
Yeah. Morning, everyone. I am just going to quickly run through this because I think you have the presentation in your packs.
Yeah.
So just a broad role on what we do in regeneration. It's really about trying to maximise external funding investment in the county. We are dealing with, so we are predicated around funding from other places, and really trying to make sure that we're ahead of the game as much as we possibly can. That often means developing projects at risk almost before we can get the money, so that we've got a pipeline of projects. Now that's quite a sensible thing to do when there's a lot of money and a lot of government investment in particular. But as we go into austerity, that becomes more of a challenge because we've then got risks of how we can spend money on things that might not then happen. So we have peaks and troughs in terms of when external funding's around as to how we can take work forward. And the other thing is that we provide the accountable body function, which means that for a lot of, not just for my service, but for other projects across the council that are perhaps in a regeneration bent or with advance, we act as the accountable body, so we take the risk out of those projects. These are the areas of investment, and I'll quickly rattle through them. They're not mutually exclusive, so something in the cultural investment portfolio will probably contribute to rural stewardship or town regeneration, etc. That we've just put them in these categories just for ease. And some of them also relate to other scrutiny committees. So some of the strategic transport stuff, for example, is in communities in place. As you know, so there's an overlap with others, but we just thought it was worth giving you an overall picture at this today. So I'm just going to quickly go through these. In terms, and I guess the point of the presentation is to give you an update, allow you to obviously ask questions, but equally to perhaps identify areas which you might want to dive into deeper in another session. Each of these slides now, I think you could have a whole session on it if you see, and it was just more to give you, rather than us perhaps bringing rather process documents that tend to go to cabinet around business case approval processes. This is more a chance to talk about the context. It's perhaps thinking about in that context, there might be particular areas that you want us to focus on and bring a more measured, that unpacks some of the information on these slides in a bit more detail. So we have towns are a big part of Northumberland's economy and the hinterlands that they serve. Blyth and Ashington, well, Blyth is a considerable programme that was largely related to the fact that the government chose Blyth for Towns Fund and Future High Street Fund. We're trying to replicate a very similar model in Ashington, but using North of Tyne money, and we've got a significant level up fund awaiting outcome from government. And then in the smaller towns, where there's a cross section of initiatives, that some of them relate to particular sectors, so heritage and culture being the ones in Hexham and Berwick, and in Borderlands, we've managed to get effectively mini town deals, we would say, for 7 of our towns to reflect what we're doing, and we're adopting again very similar process to the ones we adopted in Blyth and Ashington. And the reason I put this slide up, this probably does relate to communities and regeneration, is these are actually important hotbeds. This is where we work with the town and parish councils and other voluntary sector organisations. We do the community chest. We have community assets transfer and right to buy processes, and we also provide an external funding advisory service. And the reason why that's important to the more strategic stuff we also do is that often gives us good ideas of what things might be in other programmes. So from these acorns in small community projects, we might find bigger projects or things that we can bring together that get some more economies of scale and critical mass. We can share good practice, and as I say, that allows us to then look at external funding in a bigger scale. So we're really supporting the communities themselves to work up quite modest local projects perhaps, but we can then add value to them and possibly get more money from them. Cultural investment, culture is now seen as a major plank of regeneration, and the cultural function now sits with my service. It's been moved internally, and that's largely around the scope that it can play in town centres in particular. Retail is changing. The retail the high street is changing dramatically. Lots of rationale for that, and we really need to find ways to keep people in our town centres. There'll always be a retail element in our high street, but it'll not be perhaps as extensive as it has been in the past. And culture is often a great way of reinventing places and bringing people into particular attractions. So there's some big initiatives that we're doing. The Maltons and the barracks complexes in Berwick, Ardgeffen Distillery in Wooler, Lillydora at Annick Garden, and we're proposing a new cultural hub on Blyth Marketplace. And equally, Hadrian's Wall is obviously a World Heritage Site. It's probably one of our few truly international assets. I think if you see Hadrian's Wall anywhere in the world, everybody would know something about it. And perhaps we're now trying to think about how we can unlock its economic potential, but whilst maintaining its significant heritage interest. And equally, Destination Tweed, again, Tweed, the River Tweed, another iconic kind of asset that we have, particularly for salmon fishing in this case, really unlocking that potential. And so that's a route that's funded through Borderlands. It's going from Moffat to Berwick, or Berwick to Moffat, whichever way you're going to start it from. Not surprisingly, rural is also, there's only so much we can do working with towns and cultural assets. We do need to think about how we can work more across those more remote and less populated parts of the county. So lots of things that we're doing through Borderlands and North of Tyne. We will be bringing through some more investments that we've secured through North of Tyne to Cabinet in February. That might be something we could look at in this process. We recently secured £9 million worth of funding to really help unlock rural stewardship and rural growth. And as I say, we've got natural capital. And so again, we're bringing in, going beyond traditional economic development assets to look at the countryside and bringing in farming and forestry and nature recovery, because they are pretty instrumental to how the countryside works. And if we don't get the farming and the forestry bits right, you get increased depopulation, and again, the villages start to struggle. So really try to take a spectrum across. And then equally, we need to focus on people. This is a lot harder actually, because not the focus on people, but actually the way we get resources. As Councillor Pozak said, capital is relatively straightforward to get from external funding. Revenue is very much more challenging. So virtually everything I've spoken to up until now is capital. Revenue, really the main port of call we've got for that is North of Tyne and some in the UK Shared Prosperity Fund that's just emerging. So here we're focused on employability and really trying to make sure we get those pathways from school to and colleges and training and some of our community-based activities to make sure that people can get back into work. But it takes a long time, and these are long-scale projects that are legacy funding from Europe. And again, we'll be hoping to replicate those with UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Strategic sites, we work with Advance to really think about how we can bring forward inward investment opportunities. We have enterprise zones across, mainly across South East Northumberland and in Blyth and Ashington, although there is one in Berwick and Morpeth. And we're also looking at the Northumberland line, not just as a transport corridor, but as an economic corridor, and how we can unlock, perhaps it's the next phase of the local plan, the next wave of sites that could come forward along that corridor, and really make sure that as it's going right through the heart of our most deprived communities, how we can really link the skills and employability to that corridor and get more development and more cultural tourism offer in South East Northumberland as well. And then finally, I think strategic transport. So our landscape, our big priority project at the moment is reopening the passenger service to Northumberland line, and I've just mentioned. We also make the case to government as to why we should have major truck road network improvements, and also anything that's at a more local level, such as the Blind Relief Road. We are trying to develop a significant programme for establishing additional walking and cycling infrastructure, and we have got another level up fund bid for that one as well. Again, with all of these projects, we're relying on government funding, and unfortunately for walking and cycling, it's very city-based at this point in time, the government funding. So it's a real challenge to get development out into rural areas, but we're doing our best. And the Level Up Fund, if we got that, I think that's focused on Bedlington and the corridor between Hexham and Corbridge, that would make a big difference. And I think able to demonstrate to government changes we're making there. And then we also, for our sins, look after the commercial and subsidised bus routes across the county in the concessionary travel scheme. And there will be more work coming through. And I think that's more in the communities in place. Scrutiny. But we will be bringing work through again in the spring on the enhanced partnership, again sitting with government. There's a lot of things still stuck in government, I think, post the summer, the recent autumn statement. So yeah, I think that's me. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was great. So do you have any questions or comments on that?
Janice, you talked about cultural investment and how important that was with, especially in relationship to how high streets or changing and developing. That cross-pollinate with the Borderlands one. You obviously know what I'm talking about.
Yes, all our funding cross-pollinates, Malcolm. It's just that, once we've got the ideas, that we can then cross-pollinate and a lot of the things I've talked about are a blend of funding. That's not one. A lot of them are Borderlands and North of Tyne and something else. So yes, cross-pollination is exactly what we're about. That's the only way we get some of these things to happen.
It's just the way I understand it. Explain about the Borderlands one. Capital for business, for this cultural funding something else. If we put that in.
If there's a cultural, it depends what you mean by cultural, I think. Sports centres, for example, is not cultural. But a theatre is, you see, and it's that balance, and it's how we can package things together to make sure that it fits with the funding that we get. So yes, we can cross-pollinate the funding, but we also have to cross-pollinate the themes and what we're buying, what the government was showcasing to government that they might buy, and that's a challenge. And as you know, we're desperately trying to do that across all our towns. You know, museums and distilleries where they create a business, they're cultural. Where it's more a traditional local authority service, that's much harder for me to fund. That's seen as the local authority area of investment, and that's where the challenge comes. It's not complete black and white. There are instances where we can, but for example, the leisure centres that's happening in Berwick and Morpeth, there's no external funding going into those. Those are from the council's capital programme. So it's a challenge to kind of marry all those things up, and that's kind of part of why our service is really trying to sweat every opportunity we get.
Councillor
Just can I ask you, on the Energise and Blight programme, capital investment, 11 significant projects funded by Towns Fund and Future High Street Fund. Can you give us a flavour of what they are? It's just that, as you know, we're waiting for Bedlington, and this might help us.
Yeah. So there's a cultural hub in the marketplace. There's an energy central learning hub that's building on educational facilities that are already in the port. So that's dedicated to the energy sector, offshore wind and linked to the catapult. That's the first phase of that development, and we're planning to get, and that's really around further education and trying to get courses in that allow young people to and all residents to move into kind of college kind of activity, that's predicated around getting people into those jobs that we're creating. And then there's a second phase of that, which is about higher education and really trying to make sure that universities. So that's over the next 5 years. There'll be 2 major institutions going in, skills institutions going at the town. There's work on the catapult, technical support to that, the energy. So that's a sectoral thing where there's already campus that's focused on renewable energies. And again, they want to keep expanding and develop their product so that they're ahead of the game. They're trying to be an international leader. So again, that's predicated around sector development around a particular sector, an asset that Blythe has. There's connectivity projects. So we're doing public realm in Bow Street currently. That's just about finished now, which is part of the town centre. That will also expand out into other parts of the town centre with connectivity, cycle track coming in from Bebside from the new station into the town centre.
There's Regent Street regeneration.
So that's another public realm one. So yeah, so it's public realm. There's 2 or 3 public realm projects that are around lifting up the quality of the spaces, a bit like we did in Ashington 3 or 4 years ago.
For the deep water dock in.
Yeah, that's the last one. So that's on the other side of the river. That's on that's in Northumberland Energy Park. That's again trying to make sure that we unlock some of the assets there. So quite a lot of technical projects actually, to be honest, and linked to the assets that are in the town.
What's it better than the last one?
I think it's Shire. Yes. So yes, and that's kind of the challenge is that a lot of our investments have to resonate with the place. They are kind of bespoke to the place. So you can't just say we're going to do X, Y, and Z in a place necessarily. You have to try and marry into the assets and the strengths that it already has. So it's often an asset-based approach that we're trying to take, but often in a background where there might be market failure, which seems a bit odd, but that's kind of the balance that we're trying to strike. The reason why we intervene in places is because the private sector isn't doing it for some reason. So you notice that I didn't mention Cramlington, for example, in that presentation, and that's largely because the private sector will lead on that, and we don't really need to intervene. Lots of that will happen naturally. There'll be other towns in other periods of time that's been the case as well. So it's that balance between, as I say, working on the assets, but recognising there's a market failure that we need to unlock and perhaps subsidise. but make sure that it then stacks up financially, it can wash its face, it can survive once we've put that capital investment in.
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, so obviously when you regenerate from a starting point. So from your existing infrastructure, your existing businesses, your existing high streets and cultural centres, etc., etc. And I suppose what concerns me is how do we protect the infrastructure and what's already there and make sure it's part of the regeneration? And if I can give you a couple of examples of small businesses that I'm aware of, one which is closed in Ashington and one which could possibly close in my ward, were quite simple things that with a proper strategic approach could be resolved. Because if we regenerate and we recreate and create new, when the existing infrastructure is failing, then what's the point? You know, you're just replacing something whilst you're losing something else. So the example in Ashington, because of vandalism and constant signature bills, which cost £4,000 to replace every time, the business owner's given up. The police say they can't do anything. You know, people come in, run out the shop with hundreds of pounds worth of stuff, has to be over a certain amount, blah, blah, blah. So because of all of that, that business has failed. And in my ward, because of a tardy landlord not fixing a roof, a business which is based upon cardboard and paper, floods, loses all their stock. So again, quite simple to put right if you have a powerful body within the council to kind of push the hand, you know, strategically intervene with the police and strategically intervene with the landlord body, which is a public sector housing body, to protect the business. So I almost feel like we need some kind of a hotline so that if we're aware of businesses in our ward that are potentially going to fail, going to close, we can go somewhere, part some strategy to say, look, with some intervention, with some joined up thinking, we can save this business. And it might require a few £1,000s. It might require just a bit of effort on behalf of a few people, because it's happening not just in my ward, it's happening in lots of wards. And it's not a huge amount of money, but it's a really important infrastructure that employs local people. Last example, planning application, that obviously caused a lot of angst at a local planning committee where a business was really seriously threatened with not being able to continue to function. It's that joined up bit. How do we protect what we've already got?
Yeah, I mean, you've made a lot of great points there. And again, this comes back, I think, to capital versus revenue. And I know you're talking about small scale capital there. It's really challenging to get government funding. And I'm talking about government funding at this point in time. We'll come back to council funding around keeping things that are there. It tends to be for new things or to repurpose things that are there. Now, our relationship with Advance is the way that we try to make sure that we're looking after the existing business base, and we will have an element of small grants and the support that we can give them. So that would be the first port of call, I think, for those smaller businesses and those existing businesses that we have. But it's fair to say that it's a lot more challenging for us to access funding to create that joined up approach, as you rightly say. North of Tyne and Advance and us working together, I think I've got a better chance of doing that than perhaps other areas. And the other huge challenge is working with landlords that are not necessarily the best landlords for whatever reason. There's a limit to what our powers as well. So there's a lot of things wrapped up in what you know, horrendous evidence that you've outlined there. It's just the joining up is actually very challenging for all sorts of reasons. And I think all we've got to do is we've got to try and make sure that those are showcased more with it so that we can find solutions. But Advance, I think, are the first port of call for businesses as to how we can then harness that and perhaps develop projects that will then respond to those needs.
Thank you. Councillor, want to come with
with your indulgence, Chair, just to take on a few of those points, Councillor Murphy. So when it comes to crime and antisocial behaviour, that is a real problem for a lot of our businesses, and it's a reflection to an extent of the law. You mentioned there like a certain threshold in terms of shoplifting and so on, and that's something that we've raised very recently as part of work in Blyth with government, and we laboured this point that if the rule is that you go to the magistrates and the magistrates can't do anything to you, but I think that my family is a magistrate, and she says the worst thing that she can do is impose a £5 regular fine on someone or something like that. Well, as long as you're stealing below, please don't report this, reporter, because we don't want people to learn this lesson. Already. But basically, there's a flaw in the system that needs to be corrected. And we're working with national government to identify that problem so that they understand it, and the persistent offenders are caught. What needs to happen is persistent offenders are caught and detained and put in prison ultimately, rather than having this work, shall we say, of the system. In terms of security in town centres, to this extent that we can do things like that, I would look to the town councils to a degree. So Morpeth Town Council and other towns, as a Morpeth Town Council, I can easily identify this one, have installed CCTV equipment and so on. There might be assistance that might come from the police in terms of funds and so on if you wanted to achieve some of that. So that's something that you could pick up, and I'm sure that Regen team can help facilitate those conversations, but only if they know. So in the first instance, it doesn't matter where it goes. Flag it up to somebody, and it will find the right home. When it comes to existing businesses and so on, there's unless it's something that's statutorily a duty of that landlord to achieve, so if you've got particular things that can be statutorily enforced through enforcement through Phil Soderquist or someone like that, then there's only so much you can do. And it might be that if that business can't find a responsible landlord, that they need to find an alternative premises, or maybe you have to write on their behalf, or you might like one of the cabinet or someone or officer to write on their behalf saying, please could you address this, but of course that's can create as many problems depending on the nature of the relationship. And then the final point on some of the planning permission questions. Sometimes when a report is written, it's not always necessarily going to be the view of the committee. And I think the important thing is where you think that there's some potential injustice and so on and so forth, that sort of thing gets called into committee, and the committees invariably will look at the balanced picture and make the correct decision, as I feel was the case for the business that you're mentioning there. So I just wanted to add that some of those little bits.
I mean, just to reflect on the work we're doing with government in Blythe, which they're calling a deep dive. It is them recognising that just because you put a whole load of capital investment into a place doesn't mean to say that'll fix it, if that's the right word, and that they are now thinking about how do they help facilitate a more place-based approach that just doesn't look at the new shiny things that you can put into a place. It's about how you build the people and the ability to access those facilities, but also how do we do all the things that Richard just outlined. So I think government are starting to recognise that a joined up approach in a place will actually give them more for that capital investment. That they can add value for quite modest sums of money, to be honest. So we're hopefully on a push.
One final bit, just to add emphasis to what Janice had said on advance with regard to business support and so on. There's two real mechanisms for the council to provide business support. The first is that if there is real problems in terms of in-year viability, if there's been some real significant shock, then we can always look to some form of rate relief, but that really has to be absolutely by exception. Because otherwise everybody will ask us for a break in their rates, the same as you would for your council tax or whatever, and it's a significant income stream that we would be losing. But if there's real problems in terms of viability, we will look at that. But just to emphasise, it's a really detailed look that's taken. It's not just, we'll try it on and see what happens. It absolutely doesn't work for anyone, and they would be wasting their time filling in the forms as much as we would be wasting our time considering it. So it has to be serious. And then the second point is just those grants in one way, shape or form, whether it's through North Tyne or through the rural programme that we have or whatever. There will invariably be some form of match funding to help businesses to grow, but again, that is usually predicated on job creation and enhancement of an existing.
So the difference this time is it's a bit like if you're in a boom period and you're in an austerity period. So largely we've been in a boom period in my world, but from an economic development perspective. So the funding's predicated on growth. You only get business support if you can demonstrate growth. So that's quite a challenge. You see what I mean? Whereas now we're kind of at a cost of living crisis, we could be potentially going into a deeper austerity. Resilience is now more of a, so grants for resilience and continuation will be much easier to get. So it just takes a little while sometimes for the regeneration budgets to catch up with that. But this new rural fund will have as much a stream about resilience as it does about growth. So again, that will hopefully provide a safety net for our businesses that, to get them through this period.
Okay, I think, John?
Yeah, thank just 2-3 points. Going for different grants, not from this council, but other councils and government. Keep getting told that lots of money out there. It's just actually getting to it and doing the correct forms in the correct way. And just your opinion on it. It's so difficult unless you're actually a professional in that role, trying to get through the forms to get all of that money that is out there. It's so difficult, and I don't know how that can be made easier or what help the council can give on that side. Then going on to community chest, I mean, we do a fantastic job, and he does a fantastic job in it. But I think this round, and I don't know what other areas, but Castle Morpeth, we only had 2 applicants, and there's all that money out there. It's just getting the information out, and Ian, if they get to Ian, he does a fantastic job in filling the forms out for you. But it's such a shame when there's so many organisations who are struggling out there and they're not applying for any of the community funding. I said we've only had 2 this last batch. And on the third point, keeping town centres busy and occupied, obviously online shopping, out of town retail centres. Is there any work being done with landlords, because there's so many empty properties on the first, second floor, which are converted to housing? It helps the housing need, but it also gets people living in the town centre, which is vibrant, and it helps the community.
On that last one, it would surprise you how hard it is to get living above the shop, to be honest, mainly because of access. It's where do you get the access? Most of the access in living above the shop is through the shop. And that's where you get the problems in our town centres. Traditionally, it's 2 to 3 stories, and it's how do you get a stairwell at one end, and then you have to provide a corridor all the way along. So effectively, you negate the opportunity. So what's more likely to happen, I think, is probably you reinstate housing at the ground floor as well, where you're trying to squeeze the town centre to be a more compact town centre and bring housing in to areas that are more redundant at the edges. And so you're creating that, that I think, well, that's what naturally will happen over time, as opposed, there'll be 1 or 2 instances, don't get me wrong, but by and large, living over the shop in Northumberland-based towns is pretty challenging, unfortunately, because it looks such an obvious thing to try and do. And you're right, community, I mean, we have to bring professional advice in to get external funding for some elements of business case development. It is becoming increasingly challenging. We try our best, we try to build, particularly with the town and parish councils, we try to build the capacity within those, and we try to use these processes to build capacity within communities. So hopefully through, for example, the Borderlands Place programme, we can get communities more in tune with and we can support where we can. But you're right, it's a huge challenge. We do provide a funding service, but there's a limit to what we can do. And yes, often people have to bring in somebody to help. Yeah, unfortunately.
And about the community chest, I think we had discussion like 2 weeks ago in the cabinet that we will communicate it wider to the wider public and be more proactive to get applicants. So
Liz?
Yeah, thanks, Janice. A really informative presentation, and the town regeneration schemes are fantastic. The effort and stuff that you're putting into them. My question is, that's fine if you're living in a town, but have we anything in place to measure whether any of these schemes actually have a ripple effect on the villages or the not towns that surround the area?
It will depend. We will have, and some will be more productive in that sense than others. So for example, Blythe Cultural Hub, we would hope that will have a ripple effect once it's there. It might take a bit of time to go beyond the town. Although Bly's perhaps a bad example because there's not so many towns around it as you perhaps, it's kind of a town in its own right. In terms of places like Ashington, I would have hoped that, again, equally, if we do things in Ashington town centre, it will ripple out. Certainly, if you do something in Wooler or Berwick, that definitely ripples out. That's much more tangible. We can already see Geffrin's about to open, I think, in February. There's already quite a lot of things happening in Wooler as a result of that, and people coming. The inquiries they're getting about when it's opening, when they can come. I think that'll kickstart. So it just depends on the circumstances. I think it's easier if it's in a town, bizarrely, that's a smaller town with a wider rural hinterland, because people are traditionally going to that town for various services.
In particular, any improvement welcome.
Yeah.
But how, unless there's the public transport, that up to the places, because that isn't there at the minute. And that won't ripple out to my ward and beyond. So,
and we certainly will be looking at that through the enhanced bus service stuff. We are really trying to make sure that we can focus on those places where we need to strengthen populations of, where there's centres, how they make sure they're getting out to their hinterlands. That'll be a key driver. But again, it's trying to work through all of that. But you're right, it has mixed impacts. It's fair to say.
Which you wanted to make
just a very, very briefly. I think that probably the impact on communities like that is from the regen side is probably more about the job creation side, about some of the connectivity stuff, especially the Northumberland line. You really should see an impact in terms of access to jobs and so on. And whilst there's nothing to do with us in terms of the build, the work that's been done on that Ashington College campus and stuff like that, particularly for your board, Catherine, I think would be a real boost in terms of the facilities.
But like I said before, the transport to get to the Northumberland line in the first place has to be there.
That's where this partnership will come, the Plus Service Improvement Program. Not sure
So we're working with the region. The government announced a bus strategy last year or earlier this year. And all the regions have to put in a bus improvement plan. The North East got quite a favourable funding package. So the package has been confirmed, the amount of money. We've then submitted plans as to how we could invest that money. That's the bit we're waiting for from government as to whether they like those plans. And as I say, I think the rail infrastructure and the bus infrastructure, that part of what we've got to do here is make sure they knit together much more and we create transport hubs, a bit like the point you were making about joining things up. Because it's about joining up, I think we sometimes think about public transport in kind of two binary issues. I think with the new stations opening and the stations that we've already got in the East Coast Main Line, I think we're trying to really think about how we can make them public transport hubs, as well as reinforce some of the naturally, Tyneside is going to be the key hub that a lot of our networks will rely upon. So that's kind of the approach we're trying to take, and equally the time rail links as well.
Good. Right, thank you very much. That was very
Ask you a question about the pathways to work and upskilling and that sort of thing. I was contacted last week by a business in my ward, and he was disadvantaged because other councils were offering funding incentives to learners. He was a training business. And he was disadvantaged because other councils were offering incentives to learners, funding incentives. Now we've gone through and I'm working with them obviously now. Hopefully it will be north of 10 funding, so we might be able to get them in. But my question is, how proactive are you with this stuff going out to businesses? Or is it purely a reactive thing where businesses have got to get in touch with you?
So I will try to answer that question. So we said about North of Tyne funding, it will be probably UK Share Prosperity Fund, which will provide some skills and business support. About our acting proactively to help businesses in upskilling, and that we established Major Employer Forum like a couple of months ago, and as a result of that, we had our first meeting, was it last week? I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, which was a pilot program developed by Brian Palmer. That was as a result of that meeting, which we had a couple of months ago. which is called 21st Century Workforce for Northumberland, and he managed to get all major businesses from the county to develop a program for upskilling their workforce, to train new employees to get into the schools, to get them to the right jobs, and it's mostly in deprived areas. We are supporting them. We are partnering that program. They managed to secure some funding from Royal Engineer Society, I think it is called. And it's looking brilliant, but we just had the first meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, and it's a pilot program, but the feedback we had from all businesses were very, very positive, and they all signed up for that. They would like to develop a wider program. Basically, we are such a unique area geographically and like community that if all businesses go together to train their workforce and do things to retain them, by, for example, through upskilling, developing right career programs and development programs, even if they lose someone who will go to the competitor, that will help them collectively to get that. So we are working with them. That's one of our major achievements of major employer forum, and we'll go forward with that. Hopefully, in the next few months, we'll know a little bit more how successful it is. But it's a program which will take years, because it's not a simple thing like that you
Yeah, sorry, just to add to what the councillor said as well, the major employer forum piece of work is, as Wojciech's outlined, is really exciting, but a lot of business interest in it. But also it's useful to point out that a lot of the funding that will come from north of Tyne for both for businesses and which will be routed through providers. Advance know about that. We work with Advance very closely, so that when they're talking to businesses as well, they'll be able to talk to them about what's available in terms of what funding's around. And we've also got a couple of posts, one of which we put in Advance, who will do the business facing, talking to the businesses, and one that will sit within a council which knows around the provision that's available to really kind of match those things up. And that's very much at that kind of lower level and getting people into work. And so there's a whole range of programs to support people either getting into work, upskilling them in work, or through providers and colleges as well. So our work closely with Advance helps us then get that message across to our businesses.
It's also fair to say that through the Adult Education Skills Service in the council, that's where the training providers relationship sits, and we work so Advance Education and Skills Directorate here, that's led by Audrey Kingham, and our service working really closely to try and marry up what a trainer provider's providing and what the businesses need. That's kind of the challenge, and making sure that all parts of the system are working in tandem. And so it has to be a triumvirate between the three: the regeneration world, the business world, and the skills providers world.
One more thing, which like not as an example, we've done some business survey year, like 2 years ago or a year ago, to find out the most demanded skills in the southeast Northumberland, and we went with fabrication and welding, and that's how we went with Welding Institute to develop a welding and fabrication center, training center in Blythe. So we are trying to proactively, but we also need to speak with businesses. That's what we are trying to do, to understand their needs. And that's when Audrey and her Northumberland skills team are coming in and develop the facility.
Can I just?
Well, we make some progress as John's going to leave.
I've got one bit to add, which might answer the question, because I don't think you actually got an answer to the specific point, which was, do we provide that funding, yes or no? Or I think what would be really interesting, Mark, if you could ask, you've got to be careful with word of mouth stuff. I suspect that's actually north of Tyne money.
Yeah,
and I think
it is.
I think it is.
And I think that they just need to ask, and it's a quirk of what probably most councils, certainly this one, that education and skills tends to report into facts. But what you might want to do is get a grasp of one day for Audrey to come and tell you what they're doing on skills for employment in terms of economic overview and scrutiny, because it is a significant pillar of everything that Janice Wojcik and Sarah are doing. But we couldn't do it justice in the space of the time that we need to.
I just got a quick point and share with your indulgence, please.
Yes,
Just, 80% of our businesses are small businesses, micro businesses.
Yeah.
And you said you've just spoken to the major employers. I know that's it. It's an easy way to get a quick hit, if you like. But you've got to bear in mind that the vast majority of our businesses in this county are small businesses. And that's where we need.
And that's where this rural growth funding that we just secured, which is largely going to be based at small business level, will support that. So we've got to do it on all sorts of levels. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Right, thanks so much for that. It's a very, very good discussion. There's some great questions. Right, moving back up the agenda, we're going to item 5, which is the budget 23-24 medium-term financial plan. So I think, does Richard want to introduce this?
Yeah, I will. And I didn't do so much talking in the last section. It's nothing to do with me, just to make it really didn't have any time to ask any questions. I promise. This is in fact an update on the medium-term financial plan. Really, we sit here, myself and Jan, as it's almost like it's like the children waiting to see what Santa's going to bring from the government on round about the 21st, because without that information in terms of the local government settlement from government, all of these things in here, assumptions as best as we can manage them. So really, I mean, this report, for the most part, is just providing you a summary of where we feel we are as a snapshot in time, as I've done previously in these meetings. But the proof of the Christmas pudding will be in the meeting in about a week's time.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Jan, yep. So we'll keep waiting. So to introduce the report, as you know, this is based on various assumptions, which will be updated as we go nearer to the final budget setting. Is there anything you want to flag up in this particular report to us?
Just to say that obviously we've had the autumn statement now, so and we've had some further briefing from government officials at Dulac about the shape of the financial settlement, both for this year and for the following year. It does now look as though we're going to have a 2-year settlement, which I think will be really helpful in terms of our financial planning. So as Richard said, the devil is in the detail, and we won't know that for another week, and potentially even later than that, because often the detail of grants doesn't come until a week or two after the main settlement. But I think a 2-year settlement does give us the basis for doing a bit of forward financial planning. So I think that's helpful, and that, as I understand it, we are going to get an indication of what the referendum limits for council tax, adult social care precept, etc., is likely to be for the following year as well. So I think that's helpful, but we have to wait and see and unpack the settlement. But I'm cautiously optimistic that we're not now looking at a worst case scenario. We're looking at the medium or the middle scenario, and potentially there might even be a little bit of upside there, which would be very helpful, because clearly we've got some difficult decisions to make. So I think it's a question of watch this space, Chair.
Thank you. Members are reminded there'll be another report on this in January, a bit more detail when things are a bit clearer. But is there anything people would like to ask particularly today, or we have to just note it?
I'd just like to make the point to Richard in particular that setting this budget now, with the pressures all households are under, will probably be the defining part of your administration. And I just want to make that point in there.
Thank you, that's very kind.
Okay.
I don't disagree.
We're happy to do that. Okay. Just go back to the agenda. my bad, I did forget to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. So just to go back, are we happy to agree those?
Yeah.
Agreed. Right. Jumping around again. So back to number 6, which is council-owned company governance framework. Now, there's a separate appendix A, but also we should have received a separate cabinet report dated the 13th of December on this issue. Richard, did you want to say any words on this report?
This was down to be in the leader's report. Apologies that he couldn't attend today. This is, I'll give you a snapshot, which is this is effectively about looking at the issue of governance, predominantly really by the council in terms of the company rather than within the company, and constantly that's there are some councillors within this council who deliberately or accidentally misunderstand that aspect. This is about making sure that the governance within the council, in terms of how it interacts with its subsidiary companies, or however you want to describe them, is as we would want it, and that we can be clear in that communication, understanding what those companies are doing and reporting it back in a structured and correct way. And so what I would suggest is perhaps that I pass to Sarah to run through a little bit of the detail.
That's Sarah. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, everyone. So the report which you have there is to be considered at tomorrow's cabinet, and as the Chair pointed out, there's an annex attached to that. So really what the report does and the annex does is allow us, if Cabinet agree the recommendations, to move forward with a number of the CALA recommendations and points that CALA made in the review, particularly as Councillor Wearmouth said around that company governance framework. It recognises that there needs to be balance between allowing the companies to have the freedom to deliver their own objectives with the oversight that the council requires as the shareholder for those companies. And so that's set out in Annex A in terms of a series of principles and expectations that we as a council would have over our companies. And that is based on best practice and good practice that is out there, including that which Max Callan referred to in his review as well. So if Cabinet consider and agree the proposals, it will allow us to take a couple of interim steps while there's a wider review of the governance framework taken out, and that particularly responds to Max Callan's points around the board composition of the council's companies, particularly around skills and expertise of those boards that are needed to drive forward the companies, the number of independent non-executive directors on the boards as well, and then also the potential conflict of interest on the boards. So the principles would allow us to move towards boards that have more, an increased number of independent non-execs on the board, still one elected member and also one officer member on the boards. And that would be achieved through open and transparent recruitment, being cognizant of the skills and experience that are required on the board to do that. And the second point, the second area, as well as the board composition that we'll be able to take forward, is remuneration of the board as well. The exact remuneration will be down to company boards to agree, but the principle is to recognise that to get the best candidates for board directors, that remuneration would support that. Just to make the point that elected member directors would receive remuneration only up to the SRA limits, and council officers wouldn't receive remuneration. It would be for independent non-execs. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, there'll be wider work going on in terms of the governance review, taking forward more of the CALA comments around strengthening that governance framework for the companies. And that will come forward to Cabinet in due course. And if the recommendations from this report and the principles are accepted by Cabinet tomorrow, the shareholder rep will work with Advances, our only existing company at the moment, to take forward those principles and expectations.
Thank you very much. Good overview there. Any questions about the report? One thing wanted to check with Jan, which she confirmed earlier, was that once this is going to cabinet, and assuming cabinet agree it, the process for trying to recruit these new extra board members is going to start pretty quickly. And it's important we do it expeditiously, but also we get the right kind of people to come forward. Okay. So,
And I think just to add to that, Chair, is that's exactly the case, but there will be a transition as well. So it will be, if that will happen over a staged process over the next few weeks and months, so that the board has stability when new members come on with it.
right.
Okay, so
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a few points. I think for me, there is always an inherent tension between public sector and private sector. And obviously when you devise a model to try and make them work together and try that the public sector organisation tries to manage a private sector organisation, there are inherent tensions. And I understand you need to come up with the best model that will enable that to work. I personally believe that if you have any political involvement on that board at all, then it should be politically proportional. And I think when you have one selected individual, clearly they can only represent one party. So, you know, that's a concern that I have about it. But I also think that the idea, I suppose an underlying principle is, and I hear this all the time when we recruit the chief exec as well, that you have to pay the money to get the best. And I think that's disrespectful to the millions of volunteers in this country who are amazing, and who go onto boards and they go onto management committees and they are not remunerated for what they do. They get out of pocket expenses. So I don't accept that you have to pay to get what you need. I accept that you might choose to because it's sensible and because it might be the easiest way to get what you need, but I don't accept that the one follows the other. And my last point is, I think it is going to be a little tricky to sell this to the wider public, in the sense that, you know, we currently potentially have boards for these organisations that don't cost us any money, and we will be having boards for these organisations that will cost us a lot of money. Not necessarily us, but the companies, but still. But that's my points I wanted to make.
Okay, thank you much.
Chair.
Richard,
Just respond. So you do actually pay, I think at the moment, board members, not councillors, but you do pay non-execs. You don't have any non-execs at the minute to pay because they didn't, well, let's not go there. You don't have any. So the point being that actually is part of the company process at the moment. And having gone through that process over a period of time to try and bring non-execs in, whether it was this into the audit function or into non-exec roles on the board, it wasn't very straightforward. I completely agree with you. There are many excellent volunteers. We had 3 good members of that board at one stage, as well known, but trying to recruit into the board was really difficult. And when you're talking about 12 meetings, the sum of money that you're talking about, really, in the context of attending the meeting, reading all of board minutes and notes, reading all of the reports and so on, you will have experienced this. I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation, especially when you consider the type of knowledge and experience that you need in there as well. We would hope that we would get people with some legal background, some financial background, that you would get people maybe with project management background and so on and so forth. And so those things are really critical when you consider the breadth of the portfolio of activity as well. Councillor Murphy, so respectfully disagree is probably the best I can sort of summarise that as, but points understood and taken.
The third point I think Councillor Murphy raised was the political makeup of the board.
Yeah, so that's driven primarily by Mr. Callagher, I guess, really, in that you know, he's saying reduce political connection onto the board as much as practical, with small p, not political party connection. I think that realistically we do want some understanding in there, and we want as well some corporate knowledge in there, corporate history. So there's been a lot of change on the board over an extended period, really. And I think that we need to be mindful of the company, of the the staff at the company as well, who've gone through a lot of churn and change and need at least some element of continuity. And that corporate knowledge will be something that I think we will be building into that appointment. And the final bit as well, I know that in one way, shape or form, we operate in a political environment, and that we all, well, some of us fly under a political banner. You and I certainly do. But when you do step through the door there, that all has to be shed and removed. And I think that I know that you have been very good in that regard, and I hope that we all have when we've gone through there and you making decisions on behalf of the council in sort of a pseudo way to make sure that you're representing its interests at least. I think that we just have to monitor that and make sure that people are content that it's working. Because it's always chance for things to change and chop and change, but ideally we don't want that. We want to set off on a course that works.
Okay, so what's your time for Mark, I think you're there.
Just a couple of points, really. Richard, you know, my time on the board was spent, we had a lot of, shall we say, very partisan reporting, backhand reporting, things that the board, certainly the business, wasn't allowed to respond to for whatever reason. I don't see anything in that here to stop that. And, you know, some of us feel that it's the 67 councillors who are the shareholders of that group, and I don't see anything. In fact, it's reducing that even more the way I read the report. So and I'm not quite comfortable with that.
So Sarah might want to expand on some elements of it, but there are bits of this that is company arrangement. There's another bit that has to go alongside this, which is council arrangements in terms of how it engages. So you will be familiar with how challenging it was with certain individuals who weren't politicians in terms of their behaviour towards the company. And that wasn't at all helpful in the relationship. And it was, you know, we're all adults, right? When all of that power was put in the hands of one particular person, the relationship didn't seem to go very well. And I think that you need some means of expressing that. Now, there's the potential for the council to tie itself up in knots as to how it does that. And the most logical interface, as I think Mr. Calla said in his report, I think, was through a group of the cabinet to interface with the company alongside a shareholders representative. So the shareholders representative and the model that we used to have was very, very powerful indeed. And I don't think that was helpful at all for anybody concerned. Having a situation where you maybe have a shareholder representative who can help react quickly when the times it needs to be done, but otherwise there needs to be that council interface. The council is actually run by the administration, not by all 67 councillors. You hold the administration to account and make sure.
I would try to.
You do very well, all of you. Sometimes it's too well. But you know, so that cascade has to happen. So in the first instance, the cabinet subcommittee working with the cabinet defines the sort of the path. You scrutinise that process and make sure that that there will be a business plan put in place. There'll be a financial plan put in place, probably further. I think it's fair to say that the financial arrangements need significant improvement in terms of, you know, there was never that clarity that was provided because there were people who were not wanting that progress to be made. Quite frankly, it felt like, shall we say, and so that will help to fix what I think.
Just to add to that point, now the roadblock has gone. You'll notice that we had advance came to this committee last year, or early this year. They're coming again in March. They're going to come annually. They're mob-handed where they're going to give us a full overview of what they're doing, and we as a scrutiny committee can ask them directly questions about what's happening.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Thanks, Chair. Just for clarity for myself, that there'll be one shareholder representative, is that Jan?
Yes,
And one elected member
on the board.
on the board, yeah. So what are the procedures for actually deciding who that elected member will be?
That's for the administration to determine alongside the company, so.
So in the principles set out that the one member cannot be part of the administration,
I.e. the cabinet.
i.e. the cabinet. But beyond that, it'll be a role for the board to recruit, but working with the shareholder representative and the cabinet or the leader as his role in that. So and it'll be transparent and open process, as I said, based on what skills we need on that board. And I suppose the other thing, just to add to what Councillor Weemer said and to answer Councillor Robinson's question, that next stage in terms of that, so there's a difference between the council being on the board itself and kind of directing what it does, and that's where Max Caller said, you know, this is where we need to create those that proper governance where there's a board that can set a way and to oversee what the company's doing. Yet we have to have the arrangements in the county council to oversee that and hold that to account. So that's where we'll have this subcommittee of the cabinet to be able to do that. And then there'll be the arrangements of scrutiny and whatnot, as you would in any normal kind of cabinet committee procedure. So that will be developed to bring forward to cabinet shortly to add to what we've already got in the principles. So there'll be much more detail about how that will work in the future, in the practicalities and arrangements. Membership of that will come forward in due course.
So just
Well then,
very quickly. For 6 years now, I've never once voted on the principles that Advance should operate on. That's the problem I've got. If we all had that vote, if we all had that say, and we all agreed that these are the aims, ambitions of the company, then that's fine.
You'll get to.
That's the bit that's missing.
I understand. So the way that you would influence that would be in terms of the scrutiny of the business plan and the scrutiny of the financial arrangements, which will come periodically. I would think that you'll see that here.
But those principles has already been done, Richard, because your business plan is just the way to enable those ambitions. So what we need to do is just have the say, just say this is the overriding principles of the company, and just put it out with the council board.
I think that well, I understand that. I think that came to a previous council cabinet meeting, certainly about 3 weeks ago, in terms of the overriding principles about what the company is and how it operates and so on. I guess I don't know if that came to scrutiny or whether you could have called it in. I don't think there's anything in there that you would be horrified by. I don't think there's anything at all that could daunt anyone in the council about that. As it were, I think it's just totally logical and sensible. The bit that you really want to do is probably to inform a little bit more about the business plan, I would suspect. And you can do that by feeding back those comments to them in scrutiny meetings where you have them attending. But I understand the point. Well, Sarah, perhaps could find the cabinet report and send it to you.
Absolutely. We took through we've been carrying out a business strategy review of Advance just to focus exactly on what, as a company, we would want them to be delivering for the county council to support our objectives. And that went through, I think, to November cabinet. So happy to share that with the committee.
We raised it under the forward plan at the October meeting, and I remember that members were keen at the time to have the Advance annual report. I think there's been a number of governance type reports have gone through cabinet, and I think when that was reported before the plan in October, I think members was not feeling that actually we'd rather just have that annual report and through, so we didn't actually take it to pre-scrutiny. That was the decision of this committee at the time.
okay, are we happy with that report? Yep, okay. And like I said, they'll be coming in March, so we can build them. Right, next is the debt recovery update, so, should you introduce this?
I think that I'll pass it straight over to Jan, other than maybe to make one observation.
One, yep.
Which I can use, which is that I think this is probably a year where we're back a little bit more to normal. Previous years being heavily influenced by COVID and the government assisting significantly with businesses and individuals in terms of council tax support and business support.
Okay, Dan, anything you want to say before we go to Keith?
Well, Chair, as you know, I need to leave shortly. So I'm just going to make some very brief comments and then hand over to Keith to take you through the detail, if that's okay. I mean, the point I was going to make is the one that Richard has just made, which is clearly we're still suffering from a COVID hangover, and I think that is going to be with us for a few years yet, as we work through the financial impact of that. But we have made some progress in the first 6 months of this year. And now that we are able to resume enforcement action and recovery action through the courts, I expect us to continue to make some further progress. I'm very mindful that the cost of living crisis is a key factor here. Thus far, it doesn't appear to have had a significant impact on collection, but the longer that cost of living crisis goes on, of course, the more difficult it's going to be for people to keep up their payments. And I am expecting that there will be some impact. Probably a bit too soon, however, to say what that impact is going to be. But that's something we're going to keep a close eye on, and I'm sure this committee will want to continue to monitor that situation as well. So with those very introductory comments, Chair, if I can hand over to Keith for the detail.
Thanks very much, Keith.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the report does come to scrutiny every 6 months to show the half year and end of year position, and the committee is asked to note the report. Within the report, whether you want me to go into great detail, but the write-offs over the previous years, you can see that the level of write-offs are starting to creep up again towards what they were pre-COVID. Sundry debt, overall the level of debt is substantially less than it was at the 30th of September 21. We've then got the customers who are over £100,000. Within that list, there are some who are regular late payers and will appear on that list each time. However, the number of invoices and the amount outstanding over £100,000 as of now, since the report was since the date of the report, the number of invoices has reduced to 128, and the amount outstanding is just short of 4.4 million. We then come on to a summary of the overdue amounts by service area. Again, the level of outstanding debt is down, but there has been an increase in the number of invoices involved, and as members will have seen on the report, they're mainly within adult social care area and within local services. Within local services, they will mainly be trade waste collections. Coming on to council tax, the report summarises the collection rates, summarises the number of recovery notices that have been issued.
the recovery actions that have been taken. And again, we're starting to see levels increase again as we're coming out of COVID, but I think Jan summed it up nicely to say that it will take some time to fully recover. Similarly with the business rates, the collection rates and recovery notices and actions taken, they're summarised within the report. Housing benefit overpayments, see there the summary of performance of the team. As time goes on, their caseload will decrease as customers move away from housing benefit onto universal credit. As customers move on to universal credit, they're on the same recovery options, if I can call it that. That point. Housing summary of their performance, collection rates, amounts outstanding. Housing are above target for the current rent collections as of 30th of September. And then finally, some other developments. The revenue section has been working with through the Cabinet Office on an HMRC DWP pilot that has been going on for some time, but received the data share now, so it's too early to tell what sort of sense or otherwise that will be. And within revenues, we're looking to set a pilot with what's called a VoiceScape telephony tool. This is a tool that hopefully allow us to engage with our customers more, or for our customers to engage with us more at an earlier stage, to basically to try and set up payment arrangements without the need to have to progress the court, additional costs incurred for them, and with the cost of living crisis as we hear about it, and that's starting to take effect. I'm not sure what the correct term is, but that pilot should be good for not only us but our customers as well. Chair, that's a very brief summary.
That's a good overview. Obviously, members are familiar with this report. Anything they would like to flag up or raise concerns? Okay, I'm going to accept the report. Thank you very much. Next is done. So the work programme.
Yeah, well, we mentioned the work programme a couple of times, Chair. So you've got a fairly busy meeting in January. We've got Jan coming back for the budget position, and also the business account for the housing revenue. And also, as I said earlier, we've got the business case for the corporate government.
Right.
And all ultimately members will invite to that, and also to the February meeting, of course, you've got events coming in March. So
that was March, and then got the all members. Right. Any urgent business? None that will have been made aware of. So, oh, sorry, Buzz.
It's more of a question. Given the effect inflation's having on the current year budget, there's obviously been, well, there is measures going through the Tackle Act. We're not scrutinising any of them.
Well, we are. We get to the budget in January.
That's next year.
No, that's next budget. So
What I'm talking about is this year's budget.
Oh, this year,
Now,
as in.
we should be sitting extracurricular, and we should be sitting all the time, because there's obviously things going through council and nobody's scrutinising them. That's what I'm saying.
So
As
It's corporate and economic.
So there's a periodic update. I don't know if this committee receives it and doesn't consider it because of the nature of it being every, I can't remember, it's every month or every 2 months where it updates the current position. But actually, we just to reassure you a little bit, Malcolm, we feel that we're getting things a lot more under control in terms of the sort of the level of overspend that we might otherwise have seen. So you'll remember that, and I think this will have definitely come through you folks, that we set aside some funding because we did anticipate inflationary pressure, which we did subsequently encounter. And I know it's been reported in the press, the level of potential of overspend that we might have. It's coming down all of the time, and at each report iteration, I mean, it almost gets to cabinet. The next one comes almost straight away, and it's improved.
But we don't get this.
You don't see those. It might just be because it's such a formulaic report, but they are available. They do go to cabinet. You can see them as and when they come through, because they definitely are publicly reported, because I see them all the time in the Gazette and the Herald and so on.
What I'm primarily thinking about, Richard, is the almost moratorium on spending housing pools.
Yes.
That never came here. We were never able to question that. There might be corporate economic risks associated with that we weren't allowed to ask questions about.
Understood. Well,
that should have come here.
Always happy to give answers and feedback on that. We can do it separately after we conclude if you want. But as I say, things moving in the correct direction.
Well, I think the view from members is that we would like some reports on that. Is Jan still?
Jan's gone, unfortunately.
Well, can we feed back to Jan that maybe we want some kind of system where we can. I think
it's probably just, to be honest, Chess, sight of those reports would probably be sufficient. To,
I think what
Councillor
Wilson is saying is that obviously a financial decision was made to sort of cut or to put more time on spending, which was scrutinised by us, and that's.
Well, you know, it's in the calorie report. Yeah, told scrutiny committees to be much more robust than what they're doing. That's all we've got. That's all we're trying to do here.
Very happy for you to do that.
If we can feed that back to Jan, if we can have some.
I mean, I agree with Malcolm that we should have been scrutinising how far this year's savings have gone, because we don't know how this affects next year's budget. I mean, we haven't made the savings that we wanted to this year.
Well, to be fair, that is part of the budget meeting. You look back at the last budget and see what savings were made, etc. But it is part of the. We do look at that as part of the budget meeting. We have last year's in front of us. We're looking at the figures for last year.
The one thing I would always say is that, you know, as you go through a year, things change hugely, and it's happened every year that I've sat in the cabinet, is that you get through the projection of this level of overspend, you end up usually with an underspend, as departments identify that in fact they haven't spent all of the revenue that they needed, and which department in the middle of the year says, oh yes, well actually we've got loads of money to get back into the system, because it's so on and so forth. That doesn't happen in any company anywhere. You know, you have a projection, you try to work to it, you get to the end of year position, and that's where
we do get the end of year position as part of our budget setting. Part of the papers we get. But I think we should feedback that if decisions like moratoriums on spending are brought forward by cabinet, then we should scrutinise it.
Yeah. Some of that would just be the day-to-day practice of the 151 as the chief financial officer.
We do it to some kind of Malcolm's right. We do have teeth. We should use them occasionally. Right. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. That concludes the meeting.